All right, we're going to take a look here at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. All right, as you take a look at the pictures here, you can see the Continental soldiers moving toward battle, fighting in a line formation. All right, if you take a look at the left, you will see the Continental Army, British Army, all right, together entering the Revolutionary War. Lesson 1 is going to talk about Americans in the Revolution. All right, so we see keywords along the left side: patriot, loyalist, neutral, inflation, profiteering, and veteran. All right, it says you are there. It's 1777. Hundreds of British soldiers are marching by your house in New Jersey. The stomping of their boots scares you, and your mother pulls you and your little brother close. For 3 months, your father has been away fighting in the Continental Army. While he's been gone, your mother has been running the family's printing business. Outside, the last of the British soldiers are passing by. Their coats make a line of red across the street. Don't worry, you whisper to your brother. We'll beat them. You'll see. Take a look at the fast fact here at the bottom of 338. British soldiers spent 3 hours preparing their uniforms for review. They had to powder their hair, shine all their buttons, and polish their boots. If we take a look here, it's called personal hardships. The Declaration of Independence showed the colonial leaders had united against Britain, but the colonists themselves were deeply divided. Many had to decide whether to support independence or stay loyal to the king. Colonists who supported independence called themselves patriots. Those who remained loyal were called loyalists. We've already learned about this a little bit. About 1/3 of the colonists stayed neutral, which meant they didn't choose a side. As people took sides, friendships and families were sometimes broken. Church groups were also divided. Taking sides was especially hard for members of the Anglican Church, also called the Church of England. The king was the head of their church. Colonists faced other hardships too. Often their towns were robbed and destroyed by the British Army. In 1776, for example, British soldiers burned many areas of New Jersey. They even stole beds from colonists' homes. In turn, patriots often took goods from the loyalists, right? It was this back and forth, kind of like two toddlers fighting in the playroom, right? The British and the patriots. In some cases, patriots destroyed their own belongings to keep them from the British. So they actually would burn their own ships or burn their own buildings so the British couldn't benefit from it. Others burned their crops so the British could not get them for food, right? Take a look at that reading question. It says, how did the war affect some colonial families? All right, think about that. We'll come back to that. Economic hardships, all right, meaning the economy, money, right, trading. Along with personal problems, Americans had also faced many economic hardships during the war. One problem was a shortage of imported goods. Remember, brought in, import. British ships set up blockades so that trading ships could not unload goods at American ports, so they blocked it. Okay, British ships couldn't come in. As the shortage of goods grew worse, Americans also faced inflation. Inflation is a rise in the price of all goods. We're actually going through this right now with the pandemic. All right, prices are going up everywhere. Look at gas for your parents' cars, groceries, milk, meat. All right, it's all being inflated because there isn't a lot of it, so we're going to pay more for it. Because of inflation, people needed more money to buy the same amount of goods and services. In just about 2 months, the prices of wheat and beef had doubled. So we're going through the same thing now, just like the 1770s. Another cause of inflation was the falling value of colonial paper money called continentals. To pay for the war, Congress printed more of the paper money. By printing too much, however, the government made them less valuable. Congress also had a difficult time trying to pay for the war. Congress could not force the states to contribute money. It could only ask them. The states could say no if they chose. Because there was a shortage of goods, some farmers and shopkeepers began profiteering or charging extra, really high, crazy prices for their crops or goods. Some states passed laws that limited how much farmers could charge for food. These laws also made it illegal for people to hoard or collect and hide large amounts of goods, right? Like a hoarder. However, these laws were often broken. Women in the war. As men left their homes to fight in the war, women took on new roles. Some women ran family farms or businesses. Others raised money for the war and collected clothing for the soldiers. Some wives followed their husbands from battle to battle. Every winter, when the armies were in their winter quarters, Martha Washington traveled to be with her husband George. In army camps, women cooked food, washed clothes. Some brought water to soldiers during battles. Some girls and women joined the men in battle. One night in 1777, 16-year-old Sybil Liddington rode more than 40 miles to tell Americans of a British attack. Deborah Sampson pretended to be a man and dressed in women's clothes so that she could fight during the war. Margaret Corbin was wounded after taking her husband's place in battle. She actually went and fought once her husband was hurt. She became the first woman veteran to be recognized by Congress. A veteran is a person who has served in the military. You know that term, veteran, Veterans Day. May have relatives that are veterans. Other women used their talents to support the patriot cause. Mercy Otis Warren wrote poems and stories about the fighting for freedom. Later, she wrote the history of the American Revolution, the first by a woman. Abigail Adams, argued for freedom in letters she wrote to her husband, John, who would later become the second president of the United States. She also cared for children who had been made homeless by the war. So we think, why is this part in the textbook, women in the war? Well, before the war, women, remember, during these times were expected to stay home, learn how to be a mother, a wife, and that's about it. Girls often didn't go to school past 4th grade, and they were taught by their mothers and grandmothers how to start taking care of children and eventually to be a mother themselves. So very, very different than what we're used to today in 2021. African Americans freed and enslaved. At the start of the war, 1 of every 5 people in the 13 colonies was of African descent. Some free African Americans set up communities in northern cities such as Philadelphia. However, the majority of African Americans lived enslaved, mostly in the South. So that's 1 in 5 people was an African, or African descent. Notice we're not saying yet African American. It's the idea of being African, Africans brought over here for the slave trade. The promise of freedom. Close to 5,000 enslaved African Americans fought, now we're going toward the idea of freedom, for the Continental Army. Many were promised their freedom as a reward for their service. This promise was made to the soldiers of the Rhode Island Regiment. James Armstead, an enslaved person from Virginia, was also a spy for George Washington. The information he collected helped the Americans win an important battle at Yorktown, Virginia. After the war was over, the Virginia government gave Armstead his freedom. So it was kind of like bribery. If you fight for this side, once it's over, the war's over, you will be free. Sadly, a lot of African Americans died during the Revolutionary War and were often put on the front lines. The British governor of Virginia promised freedom to all enslaved people who fought for the British. So now we have the other side. His group of more than 300 African American soldiers wore patches that said "Liberty to slaves." Free African Americans in battle. Free African Americans took sides. Peter Salem was among at least 5 African Americans who fought the British at the Battle of Concord. He also fought at Bunker Hill. James Forten from Philadelphia was just 14 years old when he joined the Continental Army. 14. If we look out west, remember the 13 colonies are on the East Coast. Out west is yet to be explored. When the war began, many Native Americans remained neutral. Most white settlers in the West or the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains also were neutral. Native Americans were soon divided by the war. Many groups eventually sided with the British. 1777, the Mohawk agreed to help the British. The Mohawk leader, Thayendanegea, known as Joseph Brant, notice the Native American name, and they give him the name Joseph Brant, hoped to stop settlers from moving west. Groups such as the Oneida and Tuscarora fought for the Americans. The feelings of many Western settlers also changed. Many did not support the Patriot cause. They wanted to drive the British out of the land. So you can take a look there at Joseph Brant in the portrait, the Mohawk leader. A summary here basically tells us during the Revolutionary War, Americans faced personal and economic hardships. Many women and African Americans contributed to the Patriot cause. At first, Native Americans and settlers in the Western lands were neutral,